Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final week of the module on different types of crimes. This time we're going to be looking at something that I have kind of called political crimes. Really, what I mean by that is, are political leaders or rulers held to any kind of standard? Can they commit crimes? So it's kind of similar to the idea of war crimes in the sense that during war, maybe everything goes. The intent is to kill, so maybe everything should be acceptable. Maybe the same is true for rulers. Do people in charge actually have the possibility of committing a crime, or is the whole category of crime defined by the people in charge? So they don't really get to fall under that category. I think we obviously have the idea of the rule of law, and that's what I'm really talking about when I say this. In our culture and in our society, a rule of law and not men is how the full phrase goes, which means that our rulers are supposed to be kept in check by the law. They can't do anything illegal, otherwise they too can be prosecuted and taken out of office. Now, we've seen in many circumstances that this isn't always the case, even today. Well, in the ancient world, did they have any idea of a rule of law or not? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the first thing we have to define and delineate before we can talk about whether there's a rule of law is who actually enforces the law in the society in the ancient world, right? Did they have courts? Do they have judges? And what's the hierarchy, right? Who falls under what? So what's the judicial authority? What does it look like in the ancient world and the ancient Israelite world in particular? So this seems to be true for most of the ancient Middle East, most of the ancient world in general, actually even today, where courts and their jurisdictions are divided up first on the bottom at the local level, right? So you have local courts and you're supposed to go to these first if you have a problem. Then if you want to appeal, or if it's too hard for them to figure out, it kind of goes up to the provincial level. And this would be true throughout the ancient world. Like you had small localities, like a village, and then you basically had something like a province, either a larger city or area or territory that would have been the next step to go up to. Now, if we think about this in terms of blood feud, when we had that breakdown of Israelite society into tribes and clans and families, this actually kind of roughly maps out onto that, where the local level would be kind of a small family, not just a nuclear family, but kind of, an extended family making up this small local level. The provincial level would be something like a clan or a tribe. And then on the top, this is where you get the royal level, right? This is almost like equivalent to our federal government here, where you have one unified judicial authority over the whole thing. So we saw that with blood feud, where the king could actually kind of intervene in what was going on a very local level because the king has ultimate authority. So we see that in the ancient Middle East as well. Now, the question is, who watches the watchers, right? Who is above the king? It seems like there's nobody that keeps the king in check. So according to most ancient thought, that isn't true. There's not just a vacuum here. Who is it or what is it? Well, it's the gods, or we could say some kind of cosmic powers. So we do have a larger judicial authority over everything. And this isn't just in the Bible, and it's not just, religious people. Everyone would have thought this in the ancient world, that there were gods or cosmic universal powers that ruled over everything. And here I've got the little diagram here is back, right, where you can have all of the courts, but in the end, it's really the gods or these universal cosmic powers that would judge all the judges. We see evidence of this throughout the ancient Middle East. I'm not going to go through all of the evidence, but this is a very, very ancient text that was discovered in the last century. The Akkadian Maklu texts, these were essentially incantations for witchcraft and sorcery. So they're very cool texts, but we're not studying that stuff right now. The reason why we're interested in this is in a few lines. So I'm going to do this line by line. The incantation starts like this. Incantation, oh, powerful Jira, wild firestorm. I hope I'm not going to actually conjure anything as I'm saying this. You give correct decisions to gods and rulers. You provide justice for the oppressed man and woman. Stand by me in my judgment like Uama, the warrior. Judge my case, render my verdict. Right? So in this text, what we're really seeing here, and this is from the first millennium BCE, it's really ancient, is that there is a cosmic power even above the gods. And it's this wild firestorm, something like a thunderstorm. So that's why I kind of said the cosmic powers, so that there are these almost elemental powers, universal powers that are part of the elements and the fabric of the universe that judge even the gods in that belief system, and then the rulers beneath that. So see how they say you provide justice for the oppressed man and woman, even just these everyday people. It's all ultimately gonna refer back to these cosmic powers. So nobody can escape from that. Okay, so the question is, how did this work in any kind of practical way? So it's all well and good to believe that there are cosmic powers that will keep your rulers in check, but were there any practical manifestations of these gods or cosmic powers on Earth that could actually keep rulers in check? So let's see how this was thought about in ancient Israel. So there is a law of the king, just like there was the law of war, and it's also in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is very concerned with this stuff about all of the laws of the state. So in Deuteronomy 17, we have the following written. When he, the king, has taken the throne of his kingdom, he shall have a copy of this law written for him in the presence of the Levitical priests. The Levitical priests is this hereditary family that the priesthood was in. It shall remain with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear Yahweh his God, diligently observing all the words of this law and these statutes, neither exalting himself above members of the community, nor turning aside from the commandment either to the right or to the left, so that he and his descendants may reign long over his kingdom in Israel. Right? So there you go. This is one way of keeping the king in check, is having the priests come in and hand him this book of laws, or scroll really, and telling him he has to adhere to these laws. Now, what can the priests actually do about it is another question, but they certainly had that concept that the king was supposed to adhere to this written law that is above him. Another thing we see in a slightly more practical way is that there was anointing by prophets. So how does a king actually accede to the throne? Kings weren't supposed to just appoint the next king or pass down the throne, though that tended to be what actually happened. But in theory, a prophet, someone called by God, was supposed to go find the next king and anoint them, right? So here from the book of Samuel, Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him. He said, "The Lord has anointed you ruler over his people, Israel, right? So it's God has the ability to make kings and to break them, to give someone the kingship and to take it away. So this is how it's established that both the law and God are above the king and above the king's authority. So here's just a quotation from a biblical scholar who wrote about this. And you can actually find his full article on Bible Odyssey, which, as you see, I keep posting things from there because it's a great site. But he writes, although they were granted wide powers, the ancients believed that kings would suffer divine punishment if they violated the covenant and laws. So there you go. That they believed that the kings would have to remain true to God's laws. But as I kind of mentioned a couple of times, now what could they actually do about it? So they believed this, and they did sort of take the steps to give the kings a book, or to have a prophet anoint them, or at least they said they would. But what did they actually do to keep a king in check if he decided to step over the line, or if he decided, well, I don't really care about this book and I'm going to throw it in the trash? So there were 3 ways, and I can't say that any of them really worked necessarily, but there were 3 ways that ancient Israelites imagined that the king would be kept in check by God and his laws. So first, we're going to start with the priest. The priests were not only there to hand the king the kingship and to hand the king the book of the laws, but they were also supposed to be there to make decisions sometimes that went against the king. So this is a kind of check on the king's powers. How did this work? Well, it was through the idea of oracular devices. Oracular devices are instruments that we have on this earth that people believed could channel the gods and communication from God or the gods, and could give answers to questions that we have. It's kind of like reading omens. There was an oracular device that the priesthood in Israel had. And we'll look at that in a minute. So in Exodus, in this law collection there, it says, in any case of disputed ownership involving ox, donkey, sheep, clothing, or any kind of loss of which one party says this is mine and the other party says this is mine, the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to the other. So in Exodus, there's this rule that you can come before God, and then God tells you who is right and who is wrong, who's telling the truth and who isn't. That would be really convenient to have something like that now, where God is essentially working as a judge and a lie detector all in one. How did this work is the question. So the answer that biblical scholars give, and there's pretty much consensus about this, is through an oracular device. We saw the story of Achan in one of the presentations, and we saw oracular devices being used then. There it was drawing lots, right? So they actually just kind of did whatever they did, and they drew lots to figure out who the culprit was. That's a kind of oracular device, is that God is making the decision and we're interpreting those signs. But the way that was established within the temple to actually do this was a device that's pictured here called the Urim or the Urim V'Tumim, which nobody really knows exactly what that means. It seems to be a proper name for it, the Urim V'Tumim. It could mean something like light and truth, or it could mean something like truth and innocence. So this is what it looked like, we think, according to the descriptions in the Bible. It was a breastplate made of some kind of fabric with gold all over it, and then there were 12 gems, and these were gemstones that were sort of embedded in it, and those gemstones were probably removable, though we're not sure. No one knows exactly how this was used. So here's a quotation from the book of Numbers. He shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the decision of the Urim before Yahweh. So how do you make these decisions? Well, you go to the priest, and then the priest can inquire of the Urim that he's wearing on his chest. Is probably the ministering priest would wear this. Now, what did they do? So nobody knows exactly. I wish we did know. But there are theories as to how this was used. One theory, and for those who think that these gemstones were not removable, the theory was that the priest would stand in front of a window or even stand outside, and each gemstone would be an answer. So if you could have a dispute between up to 12 people or 12 families or 12 tribes, which is how many tribes there were supposed to be in Israel. And you could ask God, which one of these 12 is the one, and then whichever stone the sunlight caught and kind of bounced off of would be the one that God chose. Another theory, for those who think that these gems were removable, is that they work something like lots, right? Like you take two out if it was a dispute between two people and throw them, and whichever one went farther would be the culprit or something like that. There's a lot you can do when you have 12 gemstones that you can take out and throw or drop or place in different ways. So that could have been also how it was used. But either way, they believed that this device would answer questions that you put to it, and that those answers were given by God. This is very similar to oracular devices throughout the ancient Middle East. One famous one is the Oracle of Deir el-Medina in ancient Egypt, and they would do something like this too, where you could only ask yes or no questions, like, is it this person who stole the mat? And we actually have some of the notes that they wrote for this oracle, because Egypt is a very dry area, and so they were preserved from all the way back then on papyrus, and so we have some of these, and we can see what they actually did. So this is it he who has stolen this mat is one of the things that has been found, and then somehow they would indicate yes or no, right? Just an on-off, a 1-0 kind of answer.